Okay, so the next definition is edge profile, and the SDI glossary shows us 4 different edge profiles, and I think there's actually a variant of the rabbited that's not shown, but wouldn't see a reason to really show it. So let's just talk about edge profile. Edge profile is what they mean by what does the style on the door look like, meaning what shape is it, and the shape absolutely affects everything about it. So you can have the 4 types that they show is square edge, beveled edge, rabbited edge, and then radius edge. And all of that applies to hollow metal doors. Beveled and square edge are going to be, or squared they call it, is going to be the most common. However, you can do bull-nosed doors, and it's not bull-nosed. Bull-nosed is the wrong way to call that. Period, and I'll discuss that later. That should be called radius. I said radius initially. Their definition says bull-nosed. I don't agree that that's correct. Rabbited, got it. Okay, so when it comes to hollow metal doors, if you have typical hollow metal doors, they're going to be either beveled or square edge. Period. Then you have the rabbited and the radius edge door. Those are special scenarios, so let's just take them the way that they've shown them, beveled. That means that your door edge is going to not be square. It won't be on a 90-degree angle. It'll actually be on an either 93-degree angle or an 87-degree angle, depending on which side you look at it. Push or pull, the angle will either be greater than 90 or less than 90. And that's a 3-degree bevel, is what it is. 3-degree. That's typical. That's standard, that's common. You're not going to find in the modern era, if this is the modern era, a bevel other than 3-degree. If you look at a Yale catalog from the turn of the 20th century, you're going to definitely find a more aggressive degree on the doors. And I did a deep dive into determining what that angle is. It's more than 3. It was close to 4-degree is what it was, but I don't even recall why I did that deep dive into it. I think it was determining the mathematics of what they were trying to show. 3-degree is really important. It's really important that you're maybe not 3.0000 when you are working with a door, but if you're off, everything's going to be off, meaning your hardware won't fit correct. If you took a mortise cassette, or if you took a latch from a cylindrical lock and you took the faceplate, sometimes they're floating. They're generally floating. And that allows you to install that piece of hardware onto a square edge door, or because it floats, onto a beveled edge door. And if your degree is not 3 or really close to it, that hardware's not going to fit right. We did a job one time where we were using the CNC machine to put that 3-degree bevel down the edges, down the stiles of the door. So it was a CNC machine by Caval. They're in Petaluma, California, and the door was laying flat and pushed in, and the program that I came up with was nothing other than a giant hinge. If your door is 83 1/4, I told the CNC that my hinge length was 84 inch, and it would literally 84 inch, and because it was a hinge, it was tipping the carriage back at 3-degree, but something was wrong where it wasn't tipping it back at the proper degree. So when the door came off, the doors, it wasn't discovered till we had to rerun everything. I looked at the edge of the door and I said, boy, that bevel doesn't look right. That doesn't look correct. It's more like 2-degree. And indeed it was incorrect, so we had to rerun all that stuff. Luckily, we caught that before we did all of the laminating on the faces and stiles of the doors, because this was a plastic laminate job. We knew the hardware wasn't going to fit. It wouldn't be correct, and then I'll demonstrate later why that 3-degree and radius edge doors are really important to have that clearance. So a beveled edge door, they call it a vertical door edge, has a, here moving to a new part. A vertical door edge has a 1/8 in 2 slope from the plane perpendicular to the door pull side face. Okay, the vertical door edge, the style, has a 1/8 in 2 slope from the plane perpendicular. Okay, so they're basically saying the plane perpendicular to the face of the door has a 1/8 in 2 slope. So 1/8 in 2 is, it hasn't always been the definition. That same 125-year-old Yale catalog I referred to earlier, they didn't call it 1/8 in 2. I think it was actually 1/4 in 2. It was a much more aggressive value. That means that for every 2 inches in door thickness, from here to here, it'll be 1/8 inch less. So if this theoretical door was 2 inch thick, and it wouldn't be, it'd be 1 3/4. If this was 35 and 13/16, this would be 35 and 11/16, because that's 1/8 inch less on this 2 inch thick door. What's nice about that is we no longer care how thick the door is. Your bevel is going to be 1/8 in 2. And if you had a 4 inch thick door, doesn't matter. It's 1/8 in 2. So the difference on a 4 inch thick door, 1/8 in 2 for a 4 inch thick door, is now going to be 35 and 13/16 to 35 and 9/16 is what it would be up here. So that definition is really nice because it's convenient. What is the difference between a 35 and 13 beveled edge door on the small side or the push side when it's 1/8 in 2 on an 1 3/4 thick door? Almost 1/8 of an inch. That's all there is to it. If you want to calculate 1/8 divided by 8 multiplied by 7, there's your number. Beveled edge doors, again, need to be 3 degree, which is what 1/8 in 2 is. And I had said 35 and 13/16 earlier. That is the typical net door width on a 3.0 hollow metal door or wood door when you are beveling the edges, because you are relieving the push side face with that 1/8 or that 1/8 in 2, that 3 degree bevel. You can actually make the door a little bit wider because you'll have more ability to clear the frame. I'm holding my fist not square but more like this. I can clear that better, so I can stretch, I can make my door a little wider, and I'll demonstrate that. That's a good time to move on to the square edge door, in the sense that if you have a square edge door, the typical width on that's going to be 35 and 3/4, and you'll really only see that in hollow metal. Wood doors are going to be beveled. A square edge door needs more room, so it'll be 1/8 on either side versus 3/32. Beveled and square edge run along with the series of door that you're working on. If it's a hollow metal door, you're gonna run on a door model that's going to be beveled, either beveled one style or beveled both styles. When it comes to square edge doors, it's either going to be, you're going to run with models that are square edge doors. The beveled edge doors are unusual though, because you can see beveled lock style only in square hinge style. A lot of old time carpenters on wood doors, beveling the lock style only, absolutely normal. They don't see any reason at all to bevel the hinge style. And when you think about, in your mind's eye, the heel of the door closing, you don't really need any margin because of the approach of the heel edge of the door to the rabbet. But over here on the lock style, you do need to have that margin related to the frame opening side, related to the treatment on the edge of the door, equals the net door width that you can accomplish. I was discussing it with an old-time carpenter. His name was Pete Loeb. Loeb Home Builders. In the early 90s, he was an old-timer. And we got into a philosophical discussion, not just a discussion about talking about it from a kind of a scientific approach. And he was relating to me. He's like, "Listen, I've been hanging doors for 50 years," he'd say. And he says, "I just never ran into the need to bevel that hinge style." In our industry, we're always beveling the hinge style for the most part, because there are instances when you do need to treat that inside style. You might have a jamb that has a slight amount of twist. You might have a piece of hardware that requires a treatment to that. What comes to mind is a Rixson floor closer. You're never going to leave that square-edged out there on that inside corner of the door. Not the same as a bevel, but it is the same as giving it consideration, giving consideration to what you do on the style of the hinge. In perfect scenarios, square hinge style ought to be just fine. And I've also done a very deep dive into the swag on hinge leafs. The swag on a hinge leaf is such that it's based on you having a square edge door. If you look at the McKinney catalog, a TA 2714, those two leaves are parallel when they're closed. Well, if you have a beveled edge door on the hinge style, one leaf has got to be, the swag on the hinge has to be different. Now, we are forever installing standard hinges on beveled edge wood doors, beveled hinge style wood doors, but they're really not correct. And if you hang enough doors, you'll notice sooner or later, the hinge doesn't fit perfect, and it's because the bend on the hinge leaf is not parallel to that 3-degree bevel. If you go into the McKinney catalog, you'll see the part number. It's maybe a TA 4314, or 4714. Don't quote me, but it's there. So the importance of knowing if you're doing beveled or square edge just permeates through everything that you're doing. So when you're doing a job, you have to know if I'm specifying a Seco Medallion or a Seco Regent or a Seco Legion door, those are definitely treated different on the edge, especially on the hinge style. Here's a typical beveled edge. You can kind of see how that is beveled. That looks like a polyurethane core. I don't know what this is. Obviously just a sample. This is courtesy of Seco. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Here's a square edge door. Okay, square edge door. You might be able to tell that that's square edged. And here's a beveled edge door. I like beveled edge doors because they do give you that small amount of relief, and they do allow you to tighten up the margin between the hinge jamb and the strike jamb and the door itself. Now, having said that, you're only tightening it up by about 30 thousandths on each side. You've got 1/8 of an inch between the underside of the header and the top of the door. One might argue, let's just leave it 1/8 of an inch everywhere. Okay, fine, that's all good. And if you're going to do that, you really don't need to bevel the door if you make it 35 3/4. But when we hop to the screen view, I will show you a little bit more of that. The way that the doors are going to be manufactured is going to be dependent on beveled or square edge, meaning how they're treated for hardware. Here's a great example. Again, courtesy of Seco. Well, not the best example, but it will suffice. You got a hinge prep here. You'll notice it's not cut all the way through. You've got a hinge prep here. You'll notice it's cut all the way through. Hinges cut all the way through like this are generally used on non-handed doors, and they're used on square edge doors. That means if that's the bottom of the door and that's the top, I can hinge it this way or I can hinge it this way. Don't care. That's almost always okay, depending on the hardware. If you put an overhead stop into this, an overhead concealed stop, yeah, you've definitely got a handed door right now. But square edge doors are going to be cut all the way through. They're going to have a convertible hinge plate that will allow you to close off the edge. Your doors will come with these to allow you to kind of close off the look. But it does more than close off the look. that shim has a thickness, which is designed. There are also these teats here. If this is meant for for a 134 thousandths standard weight hinge, if you ground those down, this hinge plate will now be able to accept a heavyweight 4.5 inch hinge. So they're nice because you can just get in there and grind them down. That's how they're pretty standardized. This is not like that in the sense that it's not cut all the way through. The hinge back set, which is what that's called, is there. That's a feature on beveled edge doors. This door does not have a beveled hinge edge. This could be a Seco Legion. Their Legion door, well, this is steel stiffened, so it's probably a medallion. So the medallion door is probably a square hinge style, but it is not going to be notched all the way through. You're not going to be able to take this as a left hand and turn it over here as a right hand because it's not cut all the way through. Nor do you have the right drilled and tapped holes for hinges. This has 4 holes for hinge screws. This one over here, I guarantee you, has 8. And there they are. So you can take the hinge this way, or you can flip the hinge over and put it on this way. And that's a feature of this as well. It has to be. So they're really inherently different doors. Back in the old days when we sold Kiwani, life was super easy in the sense that they had their E-Series door, which was phased out by the time I started in the industry in late 1990. And it was then just the D door and the VMAX. Fun fact, the VMAX was the name of Fred Pippin's boat, the owner of Kiwani. The D series was their Cadillac. Not continuously, welded edges, beveled, heavy reinforcements. The best door in the world was their D door. You could do that in 18 gauge, 14 gauge, 18, 16, 14 gauge. You can do it in polystyrene, polyurethane, steel stiffened, all the good stuff. The VMAX was a square edge door. It was going to be convertible like this one. You could flip it around, non-handed, etc., etc. So you really had the best of both worlds in the sense that you want the everyday door, the VMAX, great quality door, the whole 9 yards, non-handed, so that's super nice. Or do you want a powerhouse? You want something that's really going to be built to last, heavier, a continuous hinge reinforcement down the edge. Now, none of these are a center seam door, but you will notice on the better quality doors, there's no seam here. There's welding, grinding, bondoing, sanding, and painting. That's a seamless edge door. There's definitely a seam on this door. It's an edge seam, they call it. Kiwani's VMAX was a center seam door, as was Amweld's 17, 15 series. That's an edge seam door. So edge seam doors are also a hallmark of more economy grade doors or standard doors, but an edge seam or seamless doesn't necessarily relate to the edge profile. You can take a edge seam Seco door and you can instruct them on the PO. You want that welded and filled. You don't want, and the reason you would do that, 2 reasons. It does make everything stronger, big time. Plus, it's more architecturally pleasing where you don't see this big line down the edge of the door. That matters to some people. This, to me, is definitely a cleaner look. There's no doubt about that. Seamless door being a cleaner look. Right. So being mindful of how the door is manufactured in regards to the edge profile is important because it does actually matter. Right now, I've got an order with Seco where they sent me 2 doors, 3068, 3 hinges, a lock set, deadbolt prep, and then a 12x12 cutout only. They sent me typical Baron, non-handed, reversible square edge doors. They put the deadbolt 4 inches too high on one of the 2 doors. The customer is going to want the deadbolts to be in. One is really high. It's like 16.5 inch off the top of the door, even though 20.5 is where he wants them. But they insist on me giving them the hand, and I'm telling them these are non-handed square edge doors. Do it this way. Do it this way. Doesn't matter. Now, what that tips me off to believe is that they're not using a non-handed square edge door, that they're actually going to send me a beveled edge door, on the lock style. Now that absolutely matters. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because they're no longer sending me a non-handed door. They're sending me a handed door. And they could, now what's interesting, on this door, let's assume that this is a square edge and this is a beveled edge. On this 6/8 job, oh wait a minute, oh no, it's on the 6/8 job, it's Steelcraft or Amweld locations. You may or may not know it, but the hinges and the lock set are equidistant from the top to the center or top of everything, whatever, and from the bottom to the center or bottom of everything. You could take that door and flip it over like this, it doesn't matter. But once you cut the deadbolt and once you cut the light kit into it, you can no longer do that. Those because the light's not in the center of the door, it's 60 inches above the finished floor to the center line. So I suspect it's either a matter of data entry just needing to be given a hand, or they're not sending me the same door, and I'm going to probe them as to why, but it's only one of those two reasons. So let's move on to a verbal discussion of radiused, or what they call bull-nosed, and rabbited. Let's move on and do that. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Let's move on. In the edge profile definition, let's talk about rabbited and let's talk about radius. Let's talk about rabbited first. So a rabbited door edge is you can rabbit a door edge. You can mortise a door edge. You can do sometimes, the word dado is thrown around. I think in this industry, just kind of call it a mortise. So if we're going to look at a door edge, let's think of it as if it's the bottom of a door. You've got a mortise and a rabbited edge. Rabbited and mortised. So when you cut away the face, that's really when it becomes a rabbited edge. Now, the concept with rabbited edges is, in fact, I just spent a lot of time in Europe earlier this summer, and boy, rabbited edges is everything they do. I didn't see many doors that didn't have a rabbited edge. Rabbited edge doors definitely have advantages in the sense of, because of the rabbit, you're able to really seal that door differently, or more thoroughly, I would say. You're also able to substantially increase the security over an opening because you have, and I'm going to show this to you on screen, but if you have a frame, and this is kind of how they were, and you've got this rabbited door, you're not, the latch is going to be in here. You're not getting to the latch from over here. Okay, so it's really nice. Good for sound sealing, good for weather stripping, the whole 9 yards. Complicates hardware big time, though. You will see hardware that is installed on rabbited edge doors, and that hardware is always accounted for the door edge type. There are either additional pieces you can add for rabbited, for putting hardware on rabbited edges, and then there are locks that are made for rabbited edge doors. Rabbited edge is also extremely common in single doors for weather stripping, which I'll show you that. In pairs of doors, when you have a pair of doors that are rabbited, that's nice, because now all of a sudden you don't have a line of sight between the doors, and you don't have an easy way to get a tool between the doors to be able to hook onto the exit device, pull that or push that crossbar or pull that touchpad in to get the door open. Rabbited edges are really nice. Let's move on to the radiused, or what they call bull-nosed edge. So SDI calls it bull-nosed. Well, bull-nosed is not what they're showing here. Radiused edge is what they're showing. And it's important because you're going to use a bull-nosed edge door and a radiused edge door in different applications. just as if you can have a radiused top door and an arch top door. Okay. Generally, you'd see arch top doors where that's not, that is elliptical and not a circle. But the way that some old timer taught me, bull-nosed. What's the difference between bull-nosed and radiused? When you're throwing around these terms, you should understand what they mean, because one means one thing and the other thing means another thing. Next time you're in the bathroom, any bathroom, look at the top row of tile. That top row of tile has a bull nose. So a door that is bull-nosed is going to look like that. That's a bull nose. If you take a bull-nosed door and you do that, now it's radiused. The difference is, radiused, and I guess there should be 5 edge profiles here because bull-nosing is typical. A bull nose is used when you have a single acting door where you're radiusing only half of it. You'll do that because you're using center hung pivots. That center hung pivot's going to require that clearance. But because the door is inherently single acting, there's no reason to make it a true radiused edge door. So, a radiused edge door is like the same concept of why we would bevel a door. We would ease that back so that we can allow clearance. If you have a double acting door, you have to provide clearance, and that's why the entire edge is radiused, because it's double acting. If you're doing a single acting door that requires a radius, well, don't radius it. Just round over one face of the door on the pivot style or whatever you're doing. Don't fully radius. It's not necessary, is the bottom line. Radiused edge doors, which is what they've drawn there, are indeed for double acting doors, although they don't have to be. You'll see radiused edge doors, aluminum storefront, that are single acting. But the door itself would double act because it has that big easing over the entire edge of the door. So I would say that of door edges that are not beveled, square, or rabbited, you've got 2 others really, radiused and bull-nosed. And bullnosing is single acting doors where you've got center hung pivots and usually definitely some type of stop and some sort of a concealed edge. Radiused edge doors are double acting doors. And you don't have to radius or bullnose a door edge for the hardware, but you're going to end up finding that you've got to make the door width much noticeably narrower because you're accounting for that tight margin by just making the door smaller in width. Okay, let's switch to the screen view and let's look at all of this good stuff. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Okay, let's jump into the SDI definition. Here it is. Edge profile, description of the vertical door edge, beveled, bull-nosed, rabbited or squared, available on lock and or hinge edge. Yeah, hinge edge of a rabbited door, that's not impossible, but you'll need to give thought as to how you'll hang the door. So here we are, beveled, bull-nosed, again, radiused, we like that better, rabbited and squared. So let's take beveled. Obviously you can see what they're trying to show here. Let me start with Yale. I want to pull up, Yale just happened to come to mind. I want to pull up. Let's pull up the Yale 1905 catalog, literally from the year 1905. Let's also pull one up from this century. That 1905 is already loaded. Let's take a look and see. Bevel of lock, a term used. This is a definition from a 120-year-old catalog. A term used to indicate the direction in which the bevel of the latch bolt is inclined. Regular bevel, commonly indicating a lock for use on a door opening inward, or reverse bevel. That's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. One for a door opening outward. See hand and bevel of doors. Bevel of lock front. The angle of the front of a mortise lock when inclined at other than a right angle to the case. To conform to the angle of the edge of the door. See hand and bevel, page 29. Bevel of door. The angle of front edge of door. Regular bevel is usually 1/8 in 2 1/4. So that's I had said something about 1/4 inch, but 1/8 in 2 1/4. So the definition from 1905 is 1/8 in 2 1/4, not 1/8 in 2. See hand and bevel of doors, page 29. Let's go down to page 29. Yeah, great. This is what I was looking for. This is a really great example showing bevel. I'm not going to read this, but really, I've read it in the past. This is part of where I did my deep dive to try to figure out some math. Anyway, I would really recommend that you review that if you are a student of architectural hardware. You'll definitely find that very interesting. Now, hand and bevel of doors. They were talking about figure 5, which I believe to be this. Yeah, figure 5. Let's go down to the next page. You can clearly see here that they're beveling the lock edge. They're not beveling the hinge edge. Interestingly enough, we've got a rabbeted door there, and some math going on here. Talking about bevel. And again, I won't do a deep dive into this because I know I won't come up for air until tomorrow if I start that right now. So I'm going to avoid that temptation. Anyway, we were just kind of talking about bevel and showing a catalog that really dives into it. I don't know of a modern catalog that dives into it like Yale did many years ago. Now, that modern catalog, I wanted to show you how hardware is affected. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah, perfect. Exactly what I wanted. Yale, and just Yale, it could be Schlage, whatever, but Yale comes to mind because I know they have what I'm looking for. In the 5400, which is a grade 1 lock for them, they have their 2 3/4 back set latch, spring latch. Let's just look at dead latch. Doesn't matter. Look at either. You've got a 2 3/4 dead latch, dead locking models. You've got a 694 for a beveled door. Then you've got an F694 for a flat edge door. Hardware really gets impacted depending on what you're doing on the edge of the door. I had also mentioned McKinney. Let's do a dive into that McKinney hinge, because the hinge issue, whether you're just ordering BB 1279s all day long, your entire life, and you'll do it till your grave, it's not the best way to do it when you've got beveled edge doors. Let me show you what I mean. Full line catalog. Let's go TA 2714. Okay. Okay. Recommended for standard weight, medium frequency doors with closing devices. Okay, great. TA2714, good old-fashioned steel-based, not bearing type hinge. For beveled edge, where doors are beveled on hinge sides, specify TA4314 or 4714. The only difference is base material. Let's take a look at 4714. And voila. This is real. Oh, that's a raised barrel hinge. Forgive me. That's raised barrel. We don't want that. That drawing will do in a pinch. I'm looking for something better. Maybe we're just going to use that raised barrel diagram because it's fine. So imagine that this wasn't a raised barrel hinge. This is everybody's standard butt hinge right here. TA2714, 5BB1, BB81, on and on and on, FBB 191, on and on and on. But if you've got a beveled edge door, what's happening here is the bend or the angle on the door leaf changes when you have a beveled edge, because you would really want the leaf to follow the edge of the door. Now, you can open the hinge such that the hinge is kind of open, but you really do scooch the door over ever so slightly, which is not intended. So when you're working on beveled edge doors, it really is best to have the right hinge. As a result, you're going to have handing on hinges. Not that it's a big deal, but you want to order them handed so you're not flipping tips and pins over. So hardware is impacted. Nobody really thinks of this, and I usually don't ever either. But if I'm doing a project from scratch and it's not super price sensitive, because these hinges, ignore that this is raised barrel. Actually, let's look. Better here. Hinge swag for a full mortise. Leaves are parallel. No big deal. Hinge swag for a beveled door. There it is. Just a typical full mortise. Specify handing on these hinges. Angle of 3.5 degrees, 1/8 and 2. There you go. So hardware is impacted. A beveled edge door is, like I had said, very common on wood doors, like as in normal, for at least for commercial. Now let's look at hollow metal doors, because that's really what we're talking about. If I pull up the Seco catalog, and I'm doing so because I know it's super easy and straightforward, and we're going to look at, okay, Regent, probably the world's most common door on the planet. Honeycomb core. If you've ever seen a rusting honeycomb core, it's probably a Regent door. Regent. Lock edge beveled 1/8. The Omega is a non-handed square edge door. So the Regent and Omega are the same door except one square edge, period. The other is lock edge beveled only. The hinge side is going to be square edge. Let's go to the Legion Ultra door. Same door concept. The core is now polystyrene. The difference is again the same. Lock edge beveled on a Legion. The Legion's my go-to. Square edge on the Ultra door. Legion is my go-to. It's the one I order all the time. 18 gauge, 16 gauge. I want polystyrene, and I want that lock edge beveled. Imperial Versador, polyurethane core, which is probably the sample I showed earlier. Same thing. Imperial is Lock edge bevel, Versador, square edge. If you need the polyurethane core, it's an Imperial or a Versador. Medallion, steel stiffened. What do they do on medallion? My guess is that they're both styles are, oh, right here, lock edge beveled. That's it. So far, Seiko is not beveling the hinge style of a door. Temperature rise medallion. I don't see where they indicate what they're doing. That would be something you'd want to call the factory about for sure to find out. Another temperature rise door. Again, I don't see it indicated. And that's pretty much it on that. Okay, so that's beveled edge doors. And let's move on to, well, as a result of talking about bevel edge, we're kind of talking about square edge as well. And we really covered all of that. If you're doing non-handed doors, you're going to need a square edge. The only time you can take a beveled edge door and flip it over is when you are working on a if you'll just tolerate me to get to where I need to be. Hinge location chart, Amweld, Kawani, Steelcraft, 6/8. If a 6/8 door is 79 1/8, which it is, 79 1/8 minus 67 3/8. Now wait, hold the phone. These are frame dimensions. Let's work on door dimensions. Let's just look at Amweld. You got Kawani. Out of business, out of business, out of business. Or Steelcraft. If you take 79 1/8 and you subtract 67 1/4 and then 4 1/2 for the hinge, it's going to be 7 3/8. 79 1/8 minus 7.375 minus 4.5. 67 1/4. What I meant to do was 67 1/4. 7 3/8. Overall door height minus the bottom hinge location minus the hinge itself. So that leaves what's left over at the bottom of the door. And that is, sorry, I forgot where I was. Where was I? I've lost my, there it is. That's 7 3/8. The lock, 39 9/16. 39 9/16 times 2, 79 1/8. So you can flip that door over, and the customer will call and say, hey, your door's not right. What do you mean? Well, the channel is inverted on the top. I says, no, it's not. It's flush on the top. The guy's like, no, it's not. I say, put your hand on the bottom channel and tell me if it's flush or inverted. He says, the bottom is flush. I says, you hung the door upside down. So the disadvantage of that is you do get those calls occasionally, but the nice thing is you can flip bevel edges end for end, and that beveled edge doors. But you know, you have to need to be able to do that. So a square edge door and a beveled edge door, two birds, one stone. Rabbited edge. Let's talk about rabbited edge. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Okay, rabbited edge is up next. A vertical door edge which overlaps another door or frame. True. That edge can also be horizontal, meaning if you have a transom panel, very, in fact, when it comes to transom panels, especially in wood, I'm absolutely going to say that rabbeted top rails are far more common than flush. Absolutely. We're talking about steel doors, but it's important to understand rabbeted edges as they occur regardless of steel or wood. So a rabbeted edge is exactly like what they're showing here. Now, the advantage of a rabbeted edge is, well, there's certainly disadvantages. That's really going to require timing of the doors closing. You could certainly never have surface vertical rod exit devices on both doors. And it really does complicate hardware in the sense that the hardware really has to be made for this. The advantage, though, is it gives you an inherent level of additional security. It's difficult to Lloyd something through here. It also closes off sight. You can't see through that like you would through a normal pair of doors. Very appropriate also when you're thinking about this being a transom panel. And you're going to see transom panels like this all the time. Most definitely in wood. Hollow metal less, but nonetheless really appropriate for that edge to be rabbeted. Just because I've mentioned wood a couple of times now, let's take a look at national organizations. AWI, Section 1300. This Section 1300 of the AWI standard is incredibly valuable to anyone working in the wood industry. What's incredibly valuable about it is that it will show you what things look like. And the reason I show this is because when you're doing a transom panel, you really want the grain to be end matched in such a way that, imagine if you took this example here, and you cut it here, and this was the transom panel. You want that to look completely correct grain-wise as you go up the door and the transom panel. Rift cut, rotary, quartered, plain sliced, or flat cut. They then talk about the different terminology in terms of matching flitches or pieces of veneer together. Really, really important to get that right. And this document should be something that's one of the common weapons in your arsenal when it comes to understanding architectural wood doors. Anyway, when it comes to steel, obviously this stuff doesn't matter as much. That's what I was scrolling for, continuous match. I had said end matched. That's not a proper term. You're going to match it at the ends, but it'll be continuous match. The thing about these terms is this is what the Wood Door Factory is definitely using as terminology. So really good stuff. End match. It is a good term, but as you can see, there's. I was thinking in my head that I wanted a continuous match. I used the term end match, realizing that it's not the proper term for continuous, although it is a proper industry term. So when it comes to wood doors and rabbeted top rails and transom panels, this is not a decision that you make on your own in terms of what matching the client wants. Your pricing is dependent on what the client selects. It has to be specified. Unless it's paint grade, it has to be specified. Even if it's paint grade, I would specify it, because you never know. The client might say, I want all paint grade, so you send them rotary natural birch. And then they decide later, you go to the job and they put a stain on it. You said, wait a minute, you told me you were going to paint those. Oh, no, we decided to stain them. Happened countless times. Has happened. So you'll want to, even if you believe it's going to be painted, you'll say, I still want to know how you want those to be matched, just in case, so that there's no, or at least you get it in writing that the client has specified no match. Okay, so I had also mentioned about how it complicates hardware when it comes to a rabbeted edge, and it most certainly does. to get another document going here. I'm going to pull up Accurate Hardware's catalog because they have examples inside of here that are Rabbit Edge hardware. Scroll down to their product catalog. I'm going to go to Rabbited Kits. See if they show anything here. Yeah, real good. Rabbited Kits. So what's happening is, in the modern era, you're not getting locks made with a Rabbited Edge. You're getting a piece of hardware that allows you to modify an otherwise standard piece of hardware, and that's a big difference. That's to be sure. Than how it used to be. So these are add-on pieces that are here to this lock edge. Most hardware manufacturers have means by which to install material onto Rabbited edges. Okay. Now here's an example of a Yale catalog from 1905. That's actual. That entire armor front is Rabbited. Okay. You would have ordered it 66R. That was how you would have gotten a Rabbited Edge 120 years ago. Deadbolt with a Rabbited Edge. What's interesting is in Europe, and I spent some time there this summer, most doors that you encounter are Rabbited Edge. They're nice because of the ability to seal eyesight, but they're also nice because of the ability to seal for weather and sound. So these Rabbited Edge doors that we encountered all over the place. Here's a typical door in Greece, let's say, where I was for some time. That's a typical door. Rabbited Edge. Even lipped over here. They've got gasketing happening here. They've got gasketing happening here. You could put gasketing here. Really nice way to be able to seal those doors. So according to the 1905 Yale catalog, rebate, also spelled rabbit, the way we call it today is rabbit. It's a rebate as well. The offset of the abutting edges of a pair of double doors, also the corresponding offsets on the fronts and strikes of rabbited locks. See pages 29 through 31. Let's do that. 29. I like the 1905 Yale catalog. Let me show you where to get that. My website. Type in Yale. Actually, no. Go to manufacturers here, and then go to Yale. Not Yale Flash Ship. You want Yale. And then from here, you'll see all of the historic documents that we have. The 1905 catalog is right here. I like the 1905 because it's quite encyclopedic. Talks about bevel. It's a really fascinating read in the sense of, if you make a living in this industry, how it's evolved. Hand and bevel of doors. Here's a great rabbited edge. Here's also an edge. What's the proper term for figure 8? If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Yeah, shown figure 8. The standard rabbit is 1/2 inch as shown in figure 7, and the standard astragal joint has a 3/4 inch bead, the groove to receive it being slightly larger as shown in figure 8. There's 7 and 8. 1/2 inch is what they're talking about. Now this you'll see in sliding doors. You're not going to obviously see that in swinging doors. But biparting pocket doors in a residence, South Chicago neighborhood called Beverly, 19th century mansions everywhere. And I've been in one, and it had these biparting pocket and had these beautiful period locks. Okay, now another reason that we're going to talk about a rabbited edge, doesn't have to be a pair of doors, can be a single door, very, very often is, in fact. But let's go to the Dorbin catalog. They've been a weather stripping manufacturer, I'm not sure since when in the 20th century, 1930s, 1920s maybe, I'm not really sure. I know that we were doing business with them in the well, here's a check from 1945. And I know it goes to the prior decade as well. I wonder what $2.83 got you from Dorbin in 1945. Probably not very much. But the catalog is here, and we're going to look at rabbited edge gasketing. These are windows. I wouldn't call those rabbited edges. But here it is. I've gone too far. There we go. Here's a rabbited edge. You've got a dado in the hinge side. And these door edges are really common in 19th century type of construction. Far less common today in 2024 than it was in 1994 in terms of selling the material. I think we would have typically stocked it back then, but we don't anymore. Just not enough people are doing these installations new, but there are people out there doing it. People making custom doors, one-offs, and this is the only way that they're doing this. Now, the advantage of these rabbited edges is whether you are incorporating gasketing equipment that wants to see a rabbited edge, or whether you're just doing a rabbited edge, is that you are, again, really blocking the transfer of light, of sound, of the loss of energy, and even things that you don't want getting in. In Chicago, you want to keep the cold out. In Florida, it'd be nice to keep the humidity out. In New Mexico, it'd be nice to keep the scorpions out. So rabbited style edges, even though this, it's a mortised edge, not really rabbited, but think of it that way. 2 L hooks, nested J hooks, put a dado or a slot in the hinge side, and as Carl Weathers once said, now you've got a stew. So there you go. Okay, so that is rabbited edge. Let's see if we have anything else to add to rabbited edge. Again, between two doors, absolutely. Very typical. It's going to conflict with possible egress, but in terms of a security device, it's very desirable. But, you got to think about flush bolts here. You got to think about lock faces here and strike plates is what you got to do. And I've also seen the dimensions change as well. I've seen a much thinner lip happen. I think we need to go on to bull-nosed. Let's go on to bull-nosed. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Okay, so the last door edge here is bull-nosed. That's not bull-nosed, that's radiused. It's incorrect to call that bull-nosed. The vertical door edge simulates a 2 1/8 inch radius. Okay, so bull-nosed versus radius. That's a radiused edge. Bull-nosed is... This is bull-nosed. First of all, if next time you're in the bathroom, look at the top row of tile in the bathroom. The top row of tile is bull-nosed. That's bull-nosed. So when it comes to door edges, you can do radiused, and you can do bull-nosed. These are generally for double acting. These are generally done for single acting. You can do radiused on single acting doors, but you can't use bull-nosed on double acting doors. The reason that this is used is generally when you are treating the edge of the door like this, you're putting the vertical axis of pivoting somewhere in the center of the thickness of the door. As you would know, when you do a typical door, your vertical axis of pivoting is out here. That's where your hinge barrel is, right? Okay. Oh. Yeah, like this. That's where your hinge barrel is. So when you move the vertical axis of pivoting down into the center, like you would when you have a center hung pivot, you have to treat the edge of the door, because as the door opens, it's going to make contact out here. Now I have a video, I probably have some easy to show examples of why radiusing a door is important. Let's take a look. Okay, we are who we say we are, hopefully. Just waiting for the site to load. Alright, let's take a look at Bomber 7800 and why the 1.5" radius on pivot style is important. So this video, basically what I'm going to do in this video is illustrate why you need to radius a door. Here's the template for this Bomber 7800 series floor pivot. It shows you it needs an 1.5" radius. So I've drawn that here in the software. And now I'm going to demonstrate why, via rotating the object, why you need to do that. If you notice over here, if we didn't bullnose or radius or bullnose the edge, a square edge door is going to make contact with the edge of the door. That's just what's going to end up happening. So that's why it needs to be relieved in that sort of fashion. And I even get into showing what probably the minimum amount is that's there. The pivot point really, really, really matters on stuff. And this is an example of it. Here's, while it doesn't apply to what we're talking about in terms of bullnose, pivot point really matters. Now here is a video on a 5x12 butt hinge. So a 5x12 is the widest hinge that I can get commercially made. And same situation, I've got a door drawn here. And I'm going to put my pivot point. I think I've got it added here. Okay, so I'm just basically showing a standard pivot point where you don't have much to, you know, a regular butt hinge. But let's move that forward. Okay, now I'm moving the pivot point way out to where it would be, right here, to where it would be on a much wider hinge. And then you can see that you really start to get trouble with that clearance, and that's why the edge of the door has to be treated. So whether it be a piece of hardware that would require a bullnose, or more correctly called a radius edge, where you move the vertical axis of pivoting, the imaginary line down through the center of the pivot point really defines that. So what uses a radius door edge? Well, double acting doors do. Now you don't have to radius your door. If you've got a jam and you're going to double act it, you can use a square edge door. The issue is the amount of gap that you need in here is directly related to whether or not you do this to it. If you leave this at 1/4 inch, An 1.75" door is going to work, no problem. If you want to make that a 3/32 of an inch, you're going to need to radius it, or bullnose it if it's single acting. The bullnose, which is what this is, you'll use that on single acting doors that are hung on center hung pivots. Very common to use. Rixson 128s along with Rockwood 885s, concealed edge poles, a really common deployment. Radiused edge doors are going to be seen in aluminum storefront very often. To have double acting aluminum storefront on entryways into retail spaces, extremely common. They can still be single acting. You can have an auxiliary stop. You can have an auxiliary stop. Either separate or integrated. When I had said earlier about a Rockwood 885, you would also generally have a roller latch involved, and the typical roller latch is going to be the 590 that you see here. However, they do make them with the integrated stop, which is their 593. Again, really common for that bullnosed, that bullnose single acting door with center hung pivots and a concealed edge pole. Extremely common. However, you can see radiused hollow metal door edges. It is possible. And I did have a conversation with Seco or Curry's last year about this, and they sent me some documentation. And a hollow metal door is not going to have a true radius or bullnosed edge. It's going to be bent like this, and at the end of the day, it emulates the same sort of scenario. And what the factory provided me was these two different bent pieces of steel that would get welded into the door construction. So what they're showing us is a piece of flat steel. They're going to put two bends into it, then they're going to put a third bend right in the center, and they're just going to use a press brake for doing that. The issue with this is I don't know what type of radius they would be emulating with 150 degree. I could do that in AutoCAD. I could just guess because I don't know the math well enough to do that. They have another design where it's 162 degree. I would say that this would be a larger radius. 150 degree would be a tighter radius. 1.5 inch, 2 inch, whatever it is. So the factory did provide some interesting stuff there. And I did actually look it up. You've got 1 5/8 radius and 2 1/8 inch radius. So 2 1/8 inch radius and then 1 5/8 radius is what they're doing there. The question had started out by me asking, how is it done? Are you applying something to the edge of the door? Because there are other manufacturers that will take a square edge door, undersized in width, and then add a piece of aluminum or plastic that is radius like this to the edge of the door to give you that sort of finish. Seco Curry's doesn't do that. It's actually a channel that'll be welded in into the construction of the door. Used on single or double acting applications, and really it's when you're going to double act is when you'll end up doing this. Hardware does need to be thought about when it comes to this material, and what I mean by that is obviously you're going to see radiused on aluminum storefront mostly, or wood, but when it comes to the hardware, we do have to think about the impact that a radiused edge will have, and the first thing that comes to mind is going to be the faceplate for a typical Adams Wright dead latch. We'll get there. So 4900 series dead latch, and you've got to pick the faceplate, the edge plate that you need, the armor front for the door condition. Flat, radiused, or beveled. Beveled is going to be with weather stripping included, which you can get. It's going to end up being handed. You know, it depends on the lock as well. So, perfect example of a radiused aluminum storefront door. I don't think I can think of anything else to mention about edge profile. I think we've pretty much covered it. Let's move on to edge seam now. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up. Please subscribe and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.